For 20 years, we called her the help. She raised us, fed us, loved us. And we never once said, thank you. But the day our father died, we opened a letter. And the first line said, Grace is not your maid. She's your mother. Asterisk. For as long as Jacob could remember, Grace was just there. She wore navy blue uniforms with white collars. Always smelled like lavender and old lemon polish. She was the first face he saw every morning and the last one he heard whispering, "Good night, baby," when he pretended to sleep. She'd been in the Whitaker house since he was 6. Back then, Jacob used to run into the kitchen and wrap his arms around her waist as she stirred the oatmeal. "Morning, Gracie," he'd mumble into her apron. She'd smile, always. But never with her teeth. His sister, Emily, practically lived in Grace's lap. She'd braid her hair, help with homework, even sit through her nightmares when their own mother didn't come. "She's like family," Emily always said. But they all knew the unspoken rule: she wasn't. She didn't sit at the table. She didn't speak unless spoken to. And she never left her quarters on the East Wing, not even for holidays. When friends visited, Jacob referred to her as the maid, not Grace. Not because he didn't love her, but because he had learned, very young, that love was quiet when it crossed certain lines. One night, when Jacob was 15, he overheard a strange conversation between his father and Grace. "You'll always be part of this family," Mr. Whitaker had said, his voice unusually soft. Grace's voice was trembling. "Not officially, I won't. Not ever." Jacob had paused in the hallway, heart racing. But the next morning, everything was the same. Grace folded napkins. Cleaned mud off his shoes. Told him, "Good luck on your test." And so, like everything else in that house, secrets were just wallpaper. The kind you stopped noticing after enough years. Until one morning, 10 years later, the silence shattered. Jacob stood in the lawyer's office, Emily by his side, both wearing black. Their father had just been buried. And a letter was being read. "Dear Jacob and Emily," the lawyer began, "there's something I've carried too long. A truth you both deserve to know. Grace." He paused. "Is not your maid." Jacob blinked. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The letter continued, "She's your mother." And in that moment, everything Jacob thought he knew about love, blood, and loyalty exploded into dust. Emily dropped the letter. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. She's the maid. She's just Grace." Jacob stood frozen, heart pounding so loud it hurt his ears. "There's gotta be a mistake," he muttered. "This is some kind of joke." He was grieving. He was sick near the end. Delirious. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitaker handwrote this letter. Had it notarized. It was locked in his safe, labeled only after my death." Jacob looked at Emily. "She's not our mother. We have a mother." Emily didn't respond. She was staring out the window, her fingers trembling. "She practically raised us," she finally said, voice cracking. "She tucked me in more than Mom did. She taught me how to ride a bike, do you remember that?" Jacob swallowed hard. "I remember she held me all night when Grandpa died. I told her things I never told anyone else. She called me, 'my sweet girl,' every night." Emily wiped her eyes. "And I never once said I loved her back. Because I thought, she was just the help." The silence was crushing. The lawyer slid an envelope across the desk. "This is for Grace," he said. Inside, a handwritten letter sealed in red wax, and a copy of a paternity test, with Mr. Whitaker's signature. Jacob's knees buckled slightly. It was real. It wasn't a mistake. Wasn't a joke. Grace wasn't just the maid. She was their biological mother. Jacob stormed out of the office and paced the sidewalk. His mind raced. Did Mom know? He asked aloud. Did she know the woman folding her sheets, raising her kids, was the other woman? Emily came out, still pale. We have to talk to her. Jacob scoffed. What do we even say? Sorry we called you help all your life. Sorry we never hugged you like a mother. She deserves to know we know. Jacob hesitated. He thought back to the times Grace bandaged his scraped knees. Her soft voice humming lullabies from another world. Her tired eyes at the dinner table, watching, never speaking. He never once asked her about herself. She gave them everything. And they gave her silence. He exhaled deeply. Then let's go home. When they returned to the house, it didn't feel like home. The grand estate had always stood proud, white brick, trimmed hedges, polished everything. But now, it felt like a lie wrapped in wealth. Grace was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter like she had done for 20 years. Same soft hum. Same posture. Same silence. Emily stepped in first. Grace, can we talk? Grace looked up. Her eyes flicked from Emily to Jacob. Then she gave a small, familiar smile. Of course, baby. You hungry? No, Jacob said, stepping forward. We went to the lawyer's office. He read Dad's letter. Grace froze. Her hand stopped mid-wipe, cloth clenched in her fist. We know, Emily whispered. We know, you're not just Grace. Grace didn't speak. She looked down at the counter and nodded once, very slowly. Not surprised. Just, tired. Why didn't you tell us? Jacob's voice cracked. Why did you let us treat you like that? Grace finally met his eyes. Because I was told to. By who? Dad? Grace shook her head. Your mother. The room went silent. Emily swallowed. You mean, she knew. Grace's lips tightened. She knew from the beginning. She made your father choose, public image or truth. He chose silence. But he asked me to stay, so I could be near you. Even if you never knew. Jacob's hands curled into fists. She let you scrub her floors while carrying her husband's child. I carried two, Grace said gently. You, Jacob, and Emily. Emily gasped. No. That can't be. Grace stepped forward, slowly, like approaching a wild animal. She touched Emily's cheek with the softest hand. I heard your first cries. I held your first steps. I never stopped being your mother. Even if I had to pretend not to be. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Jacob stepped back. I can't. I can't do this. But then. Footsteps echoed down the stairs. And there stood Mrs. Whittaker. She was dressed in black, still mourning. But her face was made of stone. I suppose the letter's been read, she said coldly. Grace straightened, not a hint of fear in her voice. Yes. They know. Mrs. Whittaker looked at the children, then at Grace. Her lips curled slightly. Let's see what they do with the truth. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Mrs. Whittaker descended the staircase slowly, each step colder than the last. She didn't flinch. Not even when Emily burst into tears. You lied to us, Emily choked. I protected you, her mother replied. From scandal. From shame. From her. Grace didn't move. Jacob's voice shook. You mean from our own mother? Mrs. Whittaker turned to him sharply. No. From a mistake. Your father's weakness. I was never a mistake, Grace said softly. You were never meant to belong here. Silence. For 20 years, Grace had cleaned the mud off their boots, pressed their clothes, kissed their foreheads while hiding her blood. And now the woman who kept her silent was staring down at her like she was the dirt on the floor. Emily's voice cracked. He wanted us to know. He was sick, Mrs. Whittaker snapped. Delirious. You really believe he would have destroyed this family's name on purpose? Jacob stepped forward. Then why did he leave a paternity test? That froze her. The mask slipped for half a second. You didn't even tell us when he died, Jacob added. We had to find out about the funeral from the papers. What else did you hide? Mrs. Whittaker regained her composure. I did what was necessary. I built this life with dignity. With rules. And now you want to burn it down? No, Emily said through tears. You already did. Grace took a deep breath. I didn't come to tear your house apart. I came to keep my children close. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Mrs. Whittaker's voice hardened. You should have left when I asked you to. 20 years ago. I did leave, Grace whispered. Every day. I left myself behind just to stay. Jacob couldn't breathe. He felt like the walls were tilting. His whole childhood, his memories, his trust, his image of what family meant, was a lie. And the man who could have explained everything was buried 6 feet under, just days ago. The next morning, a courier delivered a small envelope to the house. It was addressed in their father's handwriting. To Grace. And my children. Jacob stared at it like it was a ghost. Grace opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a note written on aged paper. No lawyer. No legal talk. Just raw truth. Grace. You once told me that silence was the price of survival. I never knew what that meant until I watched you raise my children while being treated like a servant. I loved you. I failed you. And I failed them too. Tears slid down Grace's cheeks as she read. Jacob. Emily. Your mother, your real mother, was never supposed to be erased. I tried to keep her near, but I let fear and privilege dictate our lives. You deserve to know the full truth. Not from the papers. Not from whispers. From me. Ask her how we met. Ask her what we were forced to give up. Then ask yourselves, who really raised you? I am so sorry. Dad. Emily broke down, sobbing into Grace's chest like she had done when she was 6. Grace held her, gently, as if time had folded over itself. Jacob didn't move. He couldn't. He remembered the day his father taught him how to tie a tie. The way he'd paused when Grace walked in the room, how his hands trembled slightly. He remembered waking from nightmares as a child and finding Grace already sitting beside his bed. He remembered the day he graduated and looked for his mom in the crowd, only to find Grace crying behind a hedge, hiding from the family photo. Jacob stepped outside. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. The sky was too blue. The birds too cheerful. Everything he believed about himself was fake. He wasn't the golden boy from a perfect family. He was the secret. He was the shame. He was the son of a woman who had no seat at the table, but somehow carried the whole house on her back. And now, for the first time, she wasn't silent anymore. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He found Grace sitting on the back porch, sipping tea alone. The moonlight made her silver strands shimmer. She looked like a painting no one had bothered to frame. I need to know, Jacob said, his voice raw. How did this happen? Grace didn't flinch. She just gestured to the chair beside her. It started with kindness. Jacob sat, folding his hands. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the master's son. He was just a boy asking his mother who she really was. I came here when I was 19, Grace began. Fresh out of school. I thought I was being hired to clean houses. But your father, he saw more. She stared into the darkness. He offered me books. Conversations. He'd sit with me in the evenings, ask about my dreams. No one ever had. Jacob's chest tightened. One night, we talked about the stars. He said I deserved more than this job, and he kissed me. Jacob looked away, ashamed of how hard it was to hear. I got pregnant with you first. Then Emily 2 years later. She exhaled slowly. He wanted to leave her. He said we'd move. Start over. Then why didn't you? Jacob asked. Because your mother found out first. Grace looked him dead in the eyes. She threatened everything. She said if I stayed, she'd destroy me. No job, no home, no future. She told your father she'd raise you both as long as I stayed out of sight. And he agreed. Jacob couldn't speak. He gave me the room on the east wing, gave me silence, and called it protection. I was the help by day, and a ghost by night. Jacob's voice cracked. Why did you stay? Because leaving meant never seeing you again. Tears pooled in her eyes, but her voice stayed strong. You two were my world. Even if I had to raise you while being erased. Jacob broke. He leaned forward and cried quietly into his hands. All his life, he thought she was just the maid who cared too much. Now he knew, she was the mother who loved without recognition. And for 20 years, she had chosen pain just to stay close. The next morning, Jacob and Emily sat across from their legal mother in the drawing room. Mrs. Whittaker sipped her coffee slowly, as if nothing had changed. As if the night before had been nothing more than spilled milk. Emily couldn't take it. Why didn't you tell us? Mrs. Whittaker didn't look up. Because it wasn't your concern. Jacob slammed his palm on the table. It is now. She set the cup down delicately. What do you want me to say? That I was humiliated? That I raised another woman's children while pretending to be their mother? You didn't raise us. Emily cried. She did. She's the reason I can't remember who packed my lunch, Jacob said bitterly. She's the one who kissed my forehead when I had fevers. Where were you? Mrs. Whittaker stood. I was at galas. Board meetings. Fundraisers. I was building a reputation you could be proud of. But I'm not proud, Jacob said, standing now too. I'm ashamed I never knew who she was. Do you think your father was some romantic hero? She hissed. He didn't care who got hurt, me, you, or Grace. He wanted both worlds. And I was the only one who made him choose. You didn't choose strength, Emily whispered. You chose cruelty. Mrs. Whittaker's voice dropped cold. I chose survival. You don't understand what it's like to be a woman in this world, Jacob. Especially a woman whose husband betrays her with the maid and expects her to smile through it. I do understand, Emily said. I'm a woman. And what you did wasn't survival. It was control. Silence. Tension hung like smoke. You can't erase blood, Jacob said quietly. And now that we know the truth, we're not pretending anymore. Mrs. Whittaker stared at her children. And then she said it. She may be your mother by blood. But I was the one with the last name. The one on the birth certificates. That makes me the real one. Jacob stepped back. She's our what? He echoed bitterly. She's our mother. And you're just the one who kept her hidden. And for the first time, Mrs. Whittaker didn't have anything to say. Emily sat alone in Grace's old room. The tiny East Wing quarters, no bigger than a walk-in closet, looked smaller than she remembered. A worn Bible. A tin box of hair pins. A stack of old books Grace must have read 100 times alone. This was where their mother had lived. Jacob stood in the doorway. It doesn't make sense, he said. Dad had millions. This house has 15 rooms. And she lived here. Emily turned. We lived on top of her. Ate from her hands. Called her, just the help, while she hid every part of herself. Jacob looked down. We treated our mother like a servant. That sentence hung in the air like smoke. Emily picked up an old photo, Grace, holding baby Jacob, her face soft, eyes glowing. It had been tucked inside a worn book of poems. She held it against her chest and wept. Then, they both heard it, Grace's voice downstairs. But this time, it wasn't soft. It wasn't invisible. It was powerful. They rushed down to find her in the grand parlor, standing before Mrs. Whittaker. I stayed quiet for 20 years, Grace said, her voice steady. But I won't let you define me anymore. Mrs. Whittaker's smile was bitter. You think they'll choose you? They'll forget all this once the inheritance is on the table. Grace didn't flinch. I didn't raise them to chase money. I raised them to know love. Jacob stepped in. And you succeeded. Mrs. Whittaker turned, surprised. Jacob looked straight at Grace. I'm sorry. Emily came beside him. We love you. Tears filled Grace's eyes, but she stood tall. I don't need your apology, she said. I just needed you to know the truth. And that truth, finally spoken, echoed louder than any accusation. For once, Grace wasn't in the background. She was at the center. No longer hidden. No longer silent. No longer just the maid. Later that day, a manila envelope arrived via courier. Jacob opened it at the dining table, flanked by Emily and Grace. It was their father's final will. And one line stood out like lightning. In the event of my death, all personal wealth is to be split equally between my biological children. Jacob's breath caught. He listed us, as Grace's children. Grace's hand covered her mouth. Emily stared at the line, blinking. But, what about Mom? Jacob flipped to the final page. There, in their father's handwriting. Evelyn has her trusts, her estate holdings. My money was earned after she left my heart. I want Grace's children to have what I could never give her while I was alive. Grace sat back slowly. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. Jacob stood. He meant it. All of it. Mrs. Whittaker entered the room just in time to hear the last sentence. She glanced at the paper, her expression unreadable. He left you everything? She asked quietly. Half, Jacob said. To me. And to Emily. As Grace's children. Mrs. Whittaker's lips tightened. He meant to embarrass me one last time. No, Grace said calmly. He meant to tell the truth. And maybe even fix it. Mrs. Whittaker laughed bitterly. Fix it? He ruined my life. He ruined this house. No, Emily replied. Lies ruined this house. Mrs. Whittaker's eyes narrowed. You think she's going to replace me? No one can replace you, Jacob said. But you chose distance. She chose love. Grace stood, finally speaking directly to the woman who erased her for 2 decades. I didn't want the money. I wanted my children. And now that they know the truth, that's all I need. Mrs. Whittaker said nothing. She turned and walked out of the room, her silence heavier than a scream. Emily looked at Grace. Why didn't you ever tell us? Grace hesitated. Then she said. Because I was afraid you'd look at me the way she did. Jacob placed a hand over hers. Never again. The first article dropped 3 days later. Maid listed as mother in billionaire's will, family secrets shock town. Emily had barely woken up when her phone lit up with messages. Old college friends. Reporters. Strangers. Jacob watched the news anchors debate Grace's name like she was some scandal. She was the help, and now she's the heir, one of them laughed. Imagine the dinner conversations now. Grace sat quietly in the living room, hands folded, staring at the TV without blinking. Emily turned it off. "You don't have to watch this." "I've lived with worse," Grace whispered. The doorbell rang. Jacob opened it to find a wall of cameras. Grace stepped forward. He tried to block her, but she placed a hand gently on his arm. "I want to speak." He stepped aside. The cameras rolled. A reporter asked, "Is it true you're the biological mother of the Whittaker children?" Grace looked into the lens, not afraid, not ashamed. "Yes." The reporters went still. "Why didn't you ever speak out?" one asked. She smiled gently. "Because I wasn't allowed to." Flashbulbs went off. Her words spread like wildfire. Within hours, talk shows were dissecting her every move. Some praised her grace. Others questioned her motives. But none could deny the story, a woman who gave everything while being treated like nothing. That night, the house was quiet. Jacob sat across from Grace, watching her read an old journal. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "For the first time in a long time." "I am." Emily joined them, placing a framed photo of the three of them on the table. Taken just that afternoon. No suits. No uniforms. Just a family, for the first time, real. Jacob whispered, "We'll protect you now." Grace looked up, her eyes shining. "You already are." The next day, the family lawyer returned to the estate. He placed a folder on the table and looked at Jacob and Emily carefully. "There's something your father added at the very end. A handwritten clause. A condition." Jacob's shoulders stiffened. "What kind of condition?" The lawyer opened the document and read slowly. "This inheritance will only be released in full if Jacob and Emily publicly recognize Grace as their biological mother and add her name to the Whittaker Family Trust." Silence. Even Grace looked stunned. "I never asked him to do that," she whispered. "I didn't want your names to be taken." "I didn't want." Emily interrupted her. "We'll do it." Grace blinked. "Emily." "We'll do it," Jacob echoed. "If we don't, the money stays locked away." The lawyer nodded. "Goes into a private foundation instead. No one in the family gets it." Jacob laughed once, bitterly. "Dad really went full circle, didn't he?" Emily looked at Grace, eyes full of something deeper than love, respect. "You deserve the name. You always did." Later that afternoon, they stood at the local courthouse. The document was short. A single legal line. Biological mother, Grace L. Daniels. Jacob signed first. Then Emily. And then Grace. Her hands trembled as she placed ink on paper. When it was done, she looked at her children and whispered, "This doesn't make me more your mother." Emily hugged her. "No. But now the world knows what we always should have." Outside, Mrs. Whittaker stood watching from her car across the street. Her eyes met Grace's as she stepped out. There were no words exchanged. But for the first time, Grace didn't lower her head. And Mrs. Whittaker didn't look away. That evening, the Whittaker estate sat under golden dusk light, peaceful on the outside, storming within. Mrs. Whittaker summoned Jacob and Emily to the drawing room. She stood near the fireplace, drink in hand. For once, she looked tired, not poised, not proud. Just human. "I suppose you've made your choice," she said. Emily stayed silent. Jacob nodded. "We did. We signed her name." Mrs. Whittaker's jaw clenched. "And in doing so, you chose her over me." "No," Emily said softly. "We chose truth over lies. We chose the woman who raised us over the one who hid her." "You think she's pure?" Mrs. Whittaker snapped. "She ruined everything. My marriage, my life. She gave up everything, Jacob interrupted. So we could have a life. Mrs. Whittaker stepped closer. If you move forward with this, if you make her name public, make her your legal mother, share this house with her, then I'm done. I'll cut you off from everything I control. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Are we hearing a threat, from our own mother? Mrs. Whittaker's voice cracked. I'm giving you a choice. Her, or the legacy. Jacob stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. That legacy. It's already hers. He turned and walked away. Emily followed without hesitation. Mrs. Whittaker stood alone. Grace met them in the foyer. Her face was pale. Did she threaten you? She did, Emily said. And? Jacob looked at her with calm conviction. Then she gave us a gift. They walked past the marble pillars and into the fresh air, leaving behind years of performance, denial, and bitterness. Grace stopped and looked back once. Not at the house. At the woman in the window who once made her invisible. Then she turned forward, where the sun was still rising. The next morning, the Whittaker name was trending. But not because of scandal. Because of courage. A headline read. Children of billionaire publicly acknowledge black Maid as their biological mother, and rewrite the family legacy. Grace sat in the sunroom, sipping tea. But this time, her hands weren't trembling. This time, she sat in the big chair. The one no one ever offered her before. Emily arrived with fresh flowers. Reporters want a statement. Grace smiled. Tell them the truth is its own statement. Jacob walked in with a stack of legal papers. We added you to the foundation board. It's official. You don't just serve this house anymore. You lead it. Grace blinked slowly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Jacob replied. We chose you. The front doorbell rang. A deliveryman handed over a large parcel addressed to Grace. Inside, a framed photograph. It was the only picture she had ever taken with Mr. Whittaker. Before everything. Before the silence. Before the uniform. They were smiling. Side by side. Like equals. Like something more. Emily placed it on the mantel. You belong up there, she whispered. Grace stared at it. For years, she'd walked past portraits of ancestors she never knew. Now her face would join them, not as a worker, but as a mother. Outside, the staff stood waiting. They had heard everything. Grace stepped onto the porch. The gardener. The cook. The drivers. All stood quietly, respectfully. One by one, they nodded. Jacob turned to her. What do you want to do with this place now? She looked out across the land she had swept, polished, and wept in. Make it a home, she said. And for the first time, the Whittaker house felt like one. Months passed. The estate changed, not in marble or money, but in mood. Laughter echoed through the halls again. Staff spoke freely, not like shadows. Grace's presence was no longer silent, it was central. She held tea with donors. She rewrote scholarship plans. She walked the gardens every morning, without looking over her shoulder. Jacob watched her from the balcony one day and whispered to Emily, I never knew what dignity looked like until I saw her walk like that. Emily nodded. She walks like someone who knows who she is now. The siblings had grown too. They no longer clung to the illusion of perfection. They didn't hide behind their last name. They spoke Grace's name proudly, even when society raised eyebrows. And when they were asked if it was hard to accept, Jacob always answered the same, hard wasn't finding out. Hard was realizing how long we ignored what was right in front of us. One Sunday, Grace found a quiet moment in the old quarters, the tiny room where she had slept for 20 years. She sat on the edge of the bed, ran her fingers over the worn blankets, and whispered, "Thank you for carrying me." Then she walked out. And left the door open behind her. A small museum space was created in her honor months later, called the Room of Grace. Not for pity. For remembrance. For every woman who loved in silence. On the night of the Foundation Gala, Grace stood at the podium. The crowd, diverse, powerful, humbled, rose in applause. She looked out and smiled. "I was once the maid. I dusted the chandeliers above heads that never turned to see me." She paused. "But the greatest honor of my life wasn't being written into a will. It was being written into my children's hearts." Jacob wiped his eyes. Emily clapped until her hands ached. And somewhere deep in the crowd, even Mrs. Whittaker stood, hands folded, eyes soft. Grace ended with a whisper. "And still, I forgive you."